Today I was not wearing any underwear. It was very hot, so I thought that there was no one at home. Hurry up and do the housework. I was busy cleaning. My clothes got wet due to sweat, which made my body look clear. Then suddenly I felt someone's shadow behind me. I turned around and saw that it was my nephew. By the way, my nephew was much younger than me, but he looked like a young man. I felt very embarrassed when I saw him because he kept looking at my chest. I told my nephew that you didn't go to college. He said that I wasn't feeling well today, so I was at home. I said, "Come on, you rest. I will make tea for you." After saying this, I went to the kitchen and went to the room to make tea and give it to my nephew. I was surprised because my nephew opened my closet and looked at my private clothes. As soon as he saw me, he quickly closed the closet and lay down on the bed. I knew what he wanted. I said, "Bring it to me. I press your legs." I deliberately put my hand inside his trousers. But then my mouth fell open when I held his hand. Unwillingly, I held my nephew's. My name is Samira. I grew up in a middle class. My father was a teacher in a government school. He taught up to primary school. He taught in a school near our house. My father was a very noble person, and both my mother and father were civilized and well-mannered. We were only two sisters, while there was a considerable age difference between me and my uncle. It is more appropriate to say that I was the child of my mother's old age and was a full 12 years younger than my elder sister. My mother and father were fond of sons, but Allah gave them only 2 daughters. Since my father was educated, he never considered his daughters bad, but always raised us with love and respect. There was an ideal love between my mother and father. They would happily meet all the relatives in the family and respect everyone. My mother was also a big name in the family. She was a polite woman. Our relatives used to come to our house a lot. Because both mother and father respected them. Whenever there was a family function, we would definitely be invited, even if they were our distant relatives. Mother and father would also happily attend and bring good gifts. I was very young when mother and father got my aunt married. She had just passed her matriculation examination. At that time, it was customary to get married early. There was no special tradition of educating girls in our family, but father wanted his daughter to at least pass matriculation. My brother-in-law was a businessman. He had probably studied up to the middle school level, but he had established his business well. There was no particular obstacle in aunt's relationship. The relationship came through an acquaintance of father. Aunt was only 16 years old at that time. She was very beautiful to look at. So, after agreeing to the relationship, my parents rushed to get married. My brother-in-law belonged to our city, but his house was quite far from our house. I was only 4 years old at the time of my aunt's marriage. However, I had no place for happiness because all the relatives were together in our house and it was very grand. Apart from this, our cooks were preparing delicious food in the kitchen, so I was very happy. Until I grew up, I only remembered a glimpse of my aunt's wedding, but I would look at the pictures and remember the time when our house was very grand. She was the only grandeur of our house. After that, there was no occasion for happiness in our house. However, the second procession was also held at my aunt's funeral when the whole family gathered. My aunt passed away 15 years after her marriage, at the time of the birth of her third child. Baji's eldest son was 14 years old at the time while the younger daughter was 8 years old. Our house was in a state of doom. No one had any idea that she would leave her little innocent children so soon. She was very happy about the birth of her third son and was kissing his forehead again and again, but who knew that this love would prove to be the first and last love of a mother for this child. 2 hours after the birth of her son, her heart suddenly started beating and her condition started deteriorating. The doctor immediately gave her oxygen, but she could not breathe. Her breathing became so labored that she could not stop and she lost her true nature. When the doctor confirmed her death, we all looked at each other with wide eyes. For a long time, we could not believe that what the doctor had told us was true. My Baji was no longer in this world. Baji's grief was in its place, but taking care of her 3 children was a difficult stage. The eldest son and daughter were quite powerful at that time. They knew what a terrible fate had befallen them. Saad was trying his best to control himself, but it was extremely difficult to take care of his daughter Sawira. She would faint as soon as she saw her mother's funeral and then cry and make herself miserable as soon as she got up. Aman and Abba were in a bad mood. Just a few hours ago, they were celebrating the birth of their 3rd grandchild, while now they were overcome with grief. It seemed that in a few hours, they had crossed many milestones in their lives. Their faces were so dark at that time that they looked older than their age. I did not know how they would bear this grief. I did not understand whether I should take care of Amma and Abba or see to the arrangements for my nephew and niece or Baji's funeral. The burden of everything was on my shoulders alone. I had just passed the inter-exam and I was finding it difficult to take care of myself, but if I lost my courage at that time, then what would have happened to everyone else? So I broke all the limits of making myself courageous and my father courageous and I stood up. After encouraging and explaining to my mother and father, I went towards my uncle's children. I put my hand on Saad's shoulder and he hugged me too. Bring my mother back, Sammy. Since he was only 4 years younger than me, there was a lot of openness between us. He used to call me by my love name. Seeing him, my 8-year-old niece also called me by my name, but they both respected me immensely. I tried my best to explain to Saad that he was the one who had become the support of his younger siblings, and he understood to some extent. He was much wiser than his age. Just like that, the moments of doomsday passed and Baji was buried. Other rituals also did not show the passage of time and a month passed since Baji's death. Since Baji's death, the children had been living with us. Their school had suffered a lot. Now their father wanted to take them back, but they were not ready to go. They would cry and make themselves miserable. For the past 1 month, only me, my mother and father were busy in their care. Both I and Amla were taking care of the youngest son. There was no problem with him, we could have kept him with us, but it was fair to separate the older children from their father. Their mother had already passed away. In such a situation, if we had kept them with us, they would have been deprived of their father's affection. Many women in the family advised Amma Abba that if Samira is married to the father of these children can get a mother's love, otherwise how will he raise the children alone? He will have to get married again and everyone knows how the stepmother will treat the children. No other woman takes care of the children of another woman. My heart also trembled upon hearing the name of the stepmother. I did not want any stepmother to come to my nephews and nieces and subject them to her cruelty and oppression. I loved all 3 of them very much, while Saad was the dearest to me because he was the first guest to come to our house. I had made the little one sit on my lap and feed him. Whenever my uncle came to our house, he would climb into my lap, so I loved him the most. In such a situation, it was not possible for me to tolerate a stepmother on top of him, but there was nothing I could do. What had happened had become inevitable. I could not stop my brother-in-law from getting married again. My father decided that I should get married to my brother-in-law. My brother-in-law and his parents also wanted that it was better to bring my uncle's sister than to bring any other woman into the house. While I was surprised and worried about my father's decision, why was this possible? But he had no other choice. My mother had clearly said that if you want to refuse, you can. We will not force you, but you yourself tell me if we have any other choice. Keeping the children here forever is also not appropriate. After all, it is their father. Children go to their father. This is the only reason for this whole problem. The solution is that you sacrifice yourself for the sake of your sister's children. While my father had already made me swear, go ahead and be the mother of these children. I loved my sister's children more than my own life, and anyway, I had also passed my entrance exams. I had no such desires, nor was there anyone else in my life. I had never thought about marriage. I had always lived with my mother and father. I rarely left the house, and I had no friends, so I did not let unnecessary desires arise in my heart. For the sake of my nephews and nieces, I also said yes, and thus I was married to my sister-in-law. My husband was 15 years older than me. He was a serious-minded person anyway. The death of his wife had made him even more serious. He spoke very little and mostly worked on his work. However, he kept a close eye on his children and was very sensitive about the education and training of his children. My husband could not establish a relationship with me. Our concern was only with the children. I took care of the children and helped them with their studies, while I was also responsible for all the household chores. My husband would ask me about the children every day, but he also took care of me, fulfilled every request I made, and quickly delivered whatever I needed. My husband supported me a lot in raising the children and educating them. Even though we could not establish a relationship, we remained good friends and took special care of the children's education. Time passed without me noticing, and many years passed in this marriage. Saad had now reached college. As he was growing up, his interest in me was increasing. He had always been with me since childhood and spent most of his time with me. He would always tell me everything he said, but I had been seeing a big difference in his behavior for a few days. He was a bit hesitant. I was surprised that I did not know what had happened to Saad. He had played in my lap since childhood and had grown up in my hands, but in such a situation, I had immediately recognized the change in his behavior. I had ignored the matter for some days because I knew that this is the age when people, especially young children, feel their inclination towards different things. In such a situation, it was not at all appropriate for me to talk to Saad about it. I wanted his behavior to improve on its own. I was giving him time. I had also tried to explain it to him in subtle ways, but either he was not ready to understand or he was helpless in this matter. One night, I felt some movement outside. My husband had gone out of town for office work. I had guessed from the sound of footsteps that it was Saad. I did not know what he was doing so late at night. I was about to call him to go and sleep, but before that, he came to my room door and opened it with a slight push. I immediately became sleepy. I wanted to see what he wanted to do. He stood in the door for a while and watched and then slowly entered my room. Forgive me. After a few moments, I heard his voice. I can't stay here anymore. My patience is running out. When he finished his speech in a wet voice, someone squeezed my heart in his fist. I couldn't understand what he was talking about. I opened my eyes a little and saw him walking out the door with a bag of clothes in his hand. Where are you going? I got up and walked towards him and he walked out quickly. I also walked towards him quickly so that I could stop him from going out. I grabbed his bag from behind and pulled it. The bag came off his shoulder. I held the bag from one side while he held the bag from the other. Where are you going now? I asked in surprise. I was going to my friend, he said, looking away. But why? Leaving the house like this in the middle of the night in the absence of his father? Your mind is fine. My heart wanted to pull him and slap him. I can't stay here anymore. When he said this, I screamed. Yes, that's what I'm asking. Why can't you stay? I pulled the bag from his hand with one jerk and took it in my possession. You went wherever you were going with great enthusiasm, but tell your father. This time I also said angrily, and he looked at me. What is going on in your mind? Today you will have to tell me. I held him by the arm and made him sit on the sofa and sat down next to him. I think you have been very wronged. You ruined your whole life for us. You could have lived a good life. He bowed his head and said, I was surprised. He said, you are here. It's nothing like that. Why are you worrying about me so much? Because I've started loving you. He looked into my eyes and said. Sparks filled my body. I gave a loud gasp. He put his hand on my mouth in surprise and started to tease me. The next moment, he got up with a jolt and picked up his bag and quickly left. When I ran after him and tried to stop him, you can't leave the house alone in the middle of the night. Let your story unfold, after that the decision will be made. I knew that you would never understand me, that's why I didn't want to tell you anything. He shouted loudly. I was surprised to see his expression. Wasn't this the same Saad who had grown up in my arms? This was a different Saad. His features were different and his mannerisms were strange. I could not even imagine that Saad would change so much. I had always wanted him as my own child. I knew that she herself was very worried. I could guess her inner state from her face. Look, I was suffering from a strange conflict. If I had let her leave the house like this in the middle of the night, something bad could have happened to her. He was not yet old enough to leave the house alone in such darkness. He was studying in college and was young. He was only 19 years old. I knew that he did not have any special friends, so who was he going to? Look, let your father be happy, then go wherever he wants. We will talk in front of him. When I talked about his father, more worry came over his face. Of course, he didn't want this to reach his father, and anyway, if he found out, he would probably kill him. He was very strict in raising his children and could not tolerate such things. I feel sorry for you. I have a double relationship with you. I am not only your aunt but also your stepmother. You should have thought 1,000 times before saying this. I remembered what he said again and I kicked him in anger. I have thought 1,000 times, 1,000,000 times, I know it is very wrong, but what can I do? I feel helpless. That is why I am leaving home. I never want to show you my face. This time, he had said shyly. I was silent for a moment. He may not have the feelings he feels. Children at this age act quite unwisely and start mistaking their temporary preferences for their desires. Since I had studied psychology in FA, I had some idea about it. Okay. Come here and sit down. Now that I have lovingly held her hand and made her sit next to me. Why do you want me? I asked her this question. Her face turned red, but she did not answer. Okay. Let me tell you myself. You want me because I do all the work in you. I care a lot about people and I am a soft-hearted person and I talk with love. Do you like these habits of mine? I asked her lovingly. She nodded in the affirmative. Yes, this is all completely normal. There is nothing wrong with your desire. You want me like a mother, but you do not understand these feelings and you are calling them something else, but I have always known all this. My feelings these days are different. He was trying to explain something to me. Okay. I understand what you are saying. I want to go away from you for a few days so that I can control myself. Okay. You go to your aunt's house. This way, your father will not know about this and I will be able to keep this to myself and I will also be satisfied that you are at your aunt's house. Thankfully, this time she understood me and she nodded in the affirmative and went to sleep in her room. While I did not sleep the whole night. As soon as my husband returned from another city, he told them that Saad wanted to go to his aunt's house for a few days, who lived in another city. My husband left Saad at his sister's house, while I was worried about him, not knowing what was going on in his mind and whether he would be able to control his emotions or not. But his decision regarding the distance was better. Of course, we should have kept our distance from each other. If he doesn't see me for a few days, he will forget about this desire. Saad had college vacations, he went for a month, but his stay was prolonged and he spent the entire vacation there. Rather, his father forced him to come. Because he was not ready to come. He said that he should be admitted to a college in the same city. He himself was surprised that how Saad's heart was attached to his aunt's house that he was not even mentioning coming. When Saad entered the house, he was extremely embarrassed. I spoke to him normally. But his embarrassment could not be hidden from me. He was secretly assessing my impressions. At night, as soon as I was finishing the kitchen chores to sleep, Saad came to me. I need to talk to you, he said, and I was shocked. Somehow Saad was still not over this. Even after spending so much time there, he was still behaving strangely. I was praying from the bottom of my heart that he would have come out of this phase. I stopped working to listen to him and turned towards him. Yes, tell me, son, what is the matter? I asked him, and he immediately stood in front of me with folded hands. Forgive me. I did a lot of wrong to you. I should not have done this. After going there, I realized that I was wrong. You are even more than my mother because you made such a big sacrifice for us. Mother gives birth to children and then takes responsibility for them, but you took responsibility for your sister's children. And gave love like your own children. You took care of our happiness. I was actually impressed by you and I started calling it love. I myself did not understand my feelings that much, but after being away from you, I realized how much I loved you. I wanted you more than my mother. I could not stay away from you even for a moment, that is why I was deliberately staying there and punishing myself. When I understood my feelings, I was ashamed of you. I did not want to face you. How would I face you? You did everything for us and what I did to you. Please forgive me. Tears were falling from his eyes. He sat at my feet. After hearing his apology, a feeling of peace arose in my heart. Thank you. He had not wasted my training and he had taken care of my hard work for so many years. If he had fallen in love with me in the middle of the day and had not backed down from his stubbornness, what would I have done? I would have done it even in the eyes of my husband and would have been humiliated, although it was not my fault. Still, the training of these children was my responsibility. I was grateful to my Lord that he had saved me from falling into this difficult time and made Saad realize his mistake. Saad started liking his maternal uncle's daughter. As soon as he completed his studies, we got him married to Samia, who herself was a sweet and sensible girl. Saad started respecting and appreciating me even more than before. Saad kept me ahead in every function of his marriage and gave me immense respect. My husband was also very happy that I had trained his children well. 2 years after Saad's marriage, we also sent away our younger daughter. Her husband was a doctor. She also started living happily in her own house. My youngest son was still in school. I was paying close attention to his education and upbringing. I had every hope that soon Allah would bless me with grandchildren and great-grandchildren.